Tonight, we begin a special series about the threat from influenza. Every year, the seasonal flu emerges and kills tens of thousands of Americans and hundreds of thousands globally. But there's an even graver concern. Public health officials fear the emergence of a new, previously unknown flu virus that could be far more lethal and become a pandemic by spreading across the world. As William Brangham reports, it's happened before.
The heart and my heartbeat, yeah, because of course I didn't have a beating heart for a little bit.
6 years ago, Autumn Redinger started feeling sick, but she was a 33-year-old mom, really healthy, and so she didn't think much of it.
It was 2 days after Christmas, and I just kind of felt a little junky, a little cough here and there, but nothing horrible. I had texted my fiance, and it was a big jumbled mess, and that's when he pretty much...
The words you texted didn't make sense.
They didn't make sense. Honestly, I don't even remember him coming to pick me up.
Redinger was rushed to her local hospital in Punxsutawney, Pennsylvania, where doctors diagnosed her with the flu.
My lungs started to feel on fire.
Meaning when you would breathe in, it would burn?
Breathe in, breathe out, it burned.
The flu was attacking her lungs and filling them with fluid. She was then medevaced to University of Pittsburgh Medical Center, where she was eventually put under the care of Dr. Holt Murray.
The lungs become very boggy, they fill with water, and you're not able to move oxygen from the outside world into your bloodstream.
You can't breathe.
You can't breathe, yeah.
It kept getting worse. Her lungs were failing. She was put on a ventilator, but even that couldn't get enough oxygen into her.
It was a nurse who slipped up and made a comment about me dying. And I was just like, what? Oh yeah, you died like twice. You were on a machine to keep you alive. And I'm like...
That machine, called an ECMO, took out her dark, depleted blood, pumped it full of oxygen, and fed it back into her body.
It runs through the pump in the oxygenator and comes out cherry red.
That is a very intensive intervention to try to save someone's life.
It's as intensive as it gets. We're taking 5 liters of blood a minute, taking it out of the body, and returning it.
It went way, 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 way up.
Days like that are what keep Dr. Anthony Fauci up at night.
In 2017-18, we had the worst seasonal flu that we've had in memory, about 80,000 deaths and almost 1 million hospitalizations. You do that every year for 20, 30, 40 years.
That's a huge
toll. At the end of that time, that's a huge toll in illness and in deaths.
Fauci is the director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases at the National Institutes of Health. He says while many take the so-called seasonal flu for granted, it still kills tens of thousands in the U.S. every year.
So this is the influenza virus. This is the inner core of the influenza virus.
But the seasonal flu isn't really what Fauci loses sleep over. It's the concern that a new flu strain emerges, a virus we've never seen before and have no protections against, like what happened in 1918.
In 1918, we were swimming in the dark, as it were.
That year, a new virus emerged, triggering one of the worst pandemics in human history. Often called the Spanish flu, this virus killed at least 50 million people worldwide and reached almost every nation on Earth. About 675,000 people died in the U.S. alone.
So you had this disease that was spread very quickly across the world, that was killing millions of people, and yet people didn't know what it was that was killing them.
Dr. Jeremy Brown directs the Office of Emergency Care Research at the National Institutes of Health, and he wrote the book Influenza, the 100-Year Hunt to Cure the Deadliest Disease in History. Brown says not only did doctors not understand this was a virus sickening people, but they had no antibiotics to treat the secondary deadly pneumonia that often accompanies flu. The treatments they did have often made things worse.
So you had bloodletting, you had enemas. Everybody seemed to get an enema back then.
Exactly at the moment when you're incredibly dehydrated because of the pneumonia.
And then whiskey and champagne.
All this led to a higher than normal death rate among 20 to 40-year-olds, the people typically much less susceptible to flu. More soldiers were killed by 1918's flu than died in battle during World War I.
Asian influenza spreads rapidly.
Since 1918, the world has seen 3 flu pandemics. Thankfully, none has been as deadly as the first. There was the 1957 Asian flu, 11 years later, the Hong Kong flu, and most recently, the 2009 swine flu.
It wasn't particularly virulent, so that the number of deaths in 2009 among the general population was even less than a regular seasonal flu, even though there were many, many more infections.
The concern, of course, is that the next pandemic would be both contagious and deadly. That's what has public health officials worried today.
If or when a new virus emerges, it will be researchers here at the Centers for Disease Control in Atlanta who will try to spot it and identify it as quickly as possible.
It's not an earthquake or a hurricane with just one geography affected. The whole world is vulnerable.
When a new strain emerges, it's up to Dr. Ann Shukat and her colleagues to help identify the virus, monitor its spread, and help coordinate treatment of the sick. She's the principal deputy director of the CDC.
You don't want to have a plan that assumes things are going like this when your early observations point in another direction. So the better the working relationships are, the more quickly you can adapt, the more nimble the response.
Shukat stresses the importance of early detection. Even 2 weeks can make an immense difference in vaccine development and saving lives.
We know we will have more pandemics of influenza. It's not if, it's when.
You're confident of that?
Absolutely. The probability of a pandemic tomorrow is the same as it was in 2009. So we can't be complacent about our state of preparedness, but we can't assume that the next pandemic will be like the last ones. We have to work through the different scenarios.
And the CDC are not the only ones gaming out those scenarios.
We have not given it, I think, all of the attention that it deserves.
Last May, Johns Hopkins University put together an exercise to simulate what could happen in the next flu pandemic.
This news just in.
Congresswoman Susan Brooks of Indiana, who's co-sponsored legislation to bolster the nation's preparedness for public health emergencies, was part of the exercise.
Every time you do an exercise, you realize where the gaps are. If large numbers of people begin to get sick, actually your economy is impacted, our national security can be impacted. There's so many things that people just don't realize.
In this scenario, a year and a half into the pandemic, the hypothetical Clade X flu had killed 150 million people worldwide. A vaccine was still stuck in development. The U.S. president and vice president were both sickened, as was a third of Congress. The U.S. government nationalized the entire healthcare system to coordinate its response. And all of these were considered realistic projections.
These are the types of things that most citizens don't think about. We don't want to think about them, but yet we expect the systems to be in place to take care of them. We expect the medical community, pharmaceutical community, diagnostic community, everyone to be ready, and that's not how it works.
Depending on how we lay it in the Jeep, I'm not sure if we can all go. Is anybody listening to me?
Yes.
Years later, much of Autumn Redinger's experience is still a mystery.
You have no idea how you got the flu.
No idea. No clue. No idea.
She carries a few lingering traces of her brush with influenza, some scars and a few side effects.
I just kept telling myself, it's okay. You're a miracle. You're alive. Yeah, your toes might not bend. Yeah, your lungs act a little funny. Yeah, your memory's shot. You have a few scars, but you're alive. It might rain tomorrow.
Her case remains a striking reminder of just how serious this virus can be. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm William Brangham.
And William's series continues tomorrow night, focusing on the potential for a pandemic.